From the richest robber barons in America to entrepreneurs that gave it all away, these are the most powerful dynasties of America's Gilded Age. Up first are the Rockefellers. One of the most famous dynasties in American history, the Rockefellers built their wealth off of Standard Oil, one of the first hydrocarbon refining companies in America, making kerosene, gasoline, and of course, oil. Eventually, he even created his own pipelines and other infrastructure, monopolizing the early fuel market. He may have even had a hand in Prohibition, but not for any of the simple and stupid reasons people like to peddle. It's actually likely because he knew how revolutionary the car would be and was being, and was trying to prevent ethanol, the key ingredient of alcohol, from being used as a fuel source. Given ethanol is significantly easier to produce, is far more renewable, and burns quite cleanly, it is a possible chance. However, a few decades later, it wouldn't be an issue as oil and gas had been firmly cemented into American infrastructure. Next are the Fords. Made famous by Henry Ford and his innovative assembly line system that allowed him to produce more Model Ts than ever before, the Ford family was one of the powerhouses of the Gilded Age. Of course, the family still owns the Ford Motor Company, but they also own the Detroit Lions and the Dearborn Independent. That last one is interesting and opens up a whole new can of worms. It turns out Henry really didn't like the followers of the Torah, and despite being massively wealthy, blamed them in a series of articles for withholding money from the American people. Even worse, when a certain someone took power in 1930s Germany, Henry was his biggest fan, sending old Adolf personalized birthday gifts of cars and hundreds of thousands of Reichsmarks yearly. In fact, some believe the United States intentionally allowed Pearl Harbor to happen just to be able to declare war on Germany without angering Ford and all the other industrialists, because boy oh boy, they supported Germany a lot. Next are the Carnegies. Andrew Carnegie built his wealth off of the burgeoning steel mill industry and amassed an utterly insane amount of wealth. When he passed, he was worth more than $400 million in 1919 money, which is over $5 billion today. But Carnegie was different than his contemporaries, perhaps one of the few to avoid the title of robber baron. When he passed, instead of leaving his children in luxury, he donated $350 million of his dollars to create a large charity fund. He gave his widow a mansion and a holiday castle in Scotland, along with small trusts for each of his kids, though they would end up selling the Scottish castle due to maintenance costs. This is why so many places hold the Carnegie name. His donations funded the construction of 200 libraries, the Carnegie Institute of Technology, and the Carnegie Corporation. Next are the Vanderbilts. Cornelius Vanderbilt built the family fortune by being a cunning and vicious businessman. He worked in shipping both on sea and by rail, and was a crucial part of the early American economy. However, it was Vanderbilt's unethical business practices that most remember him for today. Things like monopolizing trade routes and then demanding tax breaks and bailouts from the government, all the while he raked in enormous profits. Thank God businessmen don't do anything like that anymore, right? Next are the Astors. The Astors were old money by the Gilded Age. Born in 1763, John Jacob Astor built his fortune off of the fur trade and eventually off of supplying poppy juice to China. You know, the substance that prompted China to start an entire war because the British were making their entire populace addicted to it? Well, after making his completely guilt-free and bloodless money, John Jacob got into real estate and more, becoming the wealthiest American by his passing right before the Gilded Age. His children would go on to become some of the most powerful and socially influential people in the nation. They would become racehorse breeders or yacht racers, or even would buy their way into a line of British royalty representing the British Astors. The family currently owns Newsweek, The Observer, Silvergate Media, Park Hotel, The Times of London, and many, many more publications. Next are the Whitneys. The Whitney family was one of the original founding American families, arriving on continent in 1635 and staying ever since. They were always wealthy, engaging in numerous colonial-era enterprises, some of which were pretty nasty to be sure. But everything changed with Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney abhorred the state of slavery, believing it to be a black stain on the American soul. Seeing that Southern slavery was primarily around using slaves for cotton farming, he set out to make slaves obsolete, and thus earn them their freedom earlier. A large portion of the cotton harvesting process involves painstakingly removing seeds from the fluff to make it suitable for use. Well, Well, Eli built the cotton gin, which automated this process of removing the seeds and preparing the cotton. It also led to cotton becoming America's largest export, which massively revived slavery, which had actually been faltering in recent years. On the other hand, his advocacy for interchangeable parts in machinery actually helped the North to outproduce the South in the Civil War. Next are the Benns. The Benn family was a prominent Gilded Age family, though they never reached the opulence of the Fords or Vanderbilts. They were successful enough. Also, an old money family, they had come to America on some of the first ships and were deeply interconnected with the burgeoning nation. George Benn, the father, became a successful banker, and his children went on to become part of numerous enterprises. Up next are the Livingstons. The Livingstons arrived in America in the mid-1600s and have been a part of the political and business elite for hundreds of years. The family includes chief justices, senators, business moguls, and even members of Canadian Parliament and government. But perhaps the most famous and destructive Livingston doesn't go by Livingston at all. George W. Bush Sr. and Jr. are both Livingstons. Isn't it interesting how the families that stay in power for generation after generation somehow manage to convince us they aren't the problem? That it's actually this minority or that marginalized group that's the real issue? Next are the Bishops. Made wealthy by Heber Reginald Bishop, the Bishop family made its wealth first by establishing sugar plantations in Cuba. If you know anything about American actions in Cuba in the mid-1800s, you'll know that this was not sunshine and rainbows, but in fact a grueling and highly exploitative industry. But once he made a large enough company, he sold it and did what any good rich person does. He took his money and invested it, and became wildly wealthy. Nothing says hard work quite like making money off of nothing but money you already have. The American dream. And finally, the Baldwins. Christopher Columbus Baldwin was the man who made the Baldwin name famous well before his great-grandson Alec became a wealthy actor. And no, Christopher Columbus is a different one than the other one. The Baldwins arrived on the original Mayflower as some of the first colonists to arrive, and soon built a fortune shipping dried goods. As you may be able to tell, the Baldwins have been rich ever since. But no, I'm sure that never having to worry about money and having a massively influential family hasn't played into that actor's success or origin whatsoever. Those were the 10 most powerful dynasties of the Gilded Age. I hope you learned something new, and I'll see you next time.